the recovery for contact derm, even when you're doing everything right, is so slow. And so I tell my patients, when they come back from patch testing, we say, okay, gee whiz, you're allergic to lanolin and it's in that Aquaphor you've been using. And so we're going to have you stop that. And I tell them at that visit, like, hey, you know what? When you come back and see me in 3 months, my goal is that you're like 30 to 50% better.
Welcome to the Learn Skin podcast with me, Dr. Raja.
And me, Dr. Hadar, where we discuss all things skin.
Join us as we delve into the art and science of skin health in today's episode.
Hey, Raja, can you say the thing I told you to tell them?
Of course. We are board-certified dermatologists. This podcast is meant for educational and informational purposes only and is not considered medical advice, nor does it serve as a substitute for professional care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional. All opinions shared do not express the views of Learn Health, Inc. Let's get to the good stuff.
Hey, Raja, how are you today?
Hey, I'm feeling great, but have you thought about what you're putting on your skin every day?
Of course, I'm a dermatologist. Are you kidding me? It's the first thing we learn in dermatology residency, no?
Or do you? Do you really understand what the ingredients are that you're putting on your skin besides the, quote, active ingredient?
I think that it's a topic that's really, really important because patients come to us all the time as dermatologists expecting us to know all this information about how to preserve skin function. But we really, really know about this when it comes to disease. But on the day-to-day and how to advise patients about cosmeceuticals or other cosmetics that are out there, I think we are a little confused and often don't get that kind of training. And so it's always good to have an expert to keep us up to speed on stuff. What do you say?
I say, let's do it. And we do have an expert because even if you think about things like moisturizers and stuff, there's a lot of stuff we put on our skin. But luckily, we have an expert, Dr. Nina Botto. She is from UCSF and she is the director of the Occupational and Contact Dermatitis Clinic. And that's where she brings her expertise in contact dermatitis to patients referred for things like patch testing and also inflammation that can occur from many complex causes. So complex inflammatory dermatoses. Nina, thanks for joining us for the podcast. Super excited to talk to you.
Well, I'm super excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
And I do want to say, even though this podcast isn't about a product line, you have now released a product line called Vetted, which is the whole principle behind it, which I love the name, is that you've thought through what you're putting on your skin. So maybe we can start with that and just talk about what is it that maybe we're all taking for granted? What are we putting on our skin, Nina? Yeah, answer it's almost like what's the meaning of life here? What are we putting on your skin?
There's a lot that we're putting on our skin, and there's even more probably that our patients are putting on their skin. And so I think that we as dermatologists are really in a unique position to help guide our patients and, sometimes ourselves through the noise of being a consumer in the beauty and skincare industry, because there are so many options out there. It is overwhelming. And with the media and multiple celebrity brands, and there's just a lot to choose from. And it's hard because there are, people are really interested in active ingredients, of course, and they tend to be less interested in the inactive ingredients. And those are really just as important.
Can you talk about that, Nina? Can you actually talk about what does it mean to be an active ingredient and what does it mean to be an inactive ingredient? What's the difference?
Yeah. So, it comes down to some extent to how active ingredients are used. And so in the US, things are either drugs or they're cosmetics. And that is actually defined by laws by the FDA, which, happened 60 plus years ago. And so there are definitions for each, and it's actually a bit confusing. And then there's things, of course, like you said, the cosmeceuticals that kind of fall in the middle and do some of both. And so depending on what product we're talking about, it's going to have different active ingredients. So for example, a sunscreen, oftentimes, you're thinking about what are the active ingredients of the sunscreen, and oftentimes on a product, those are just listed right at the top. Is it zinc? Is it titanium? Is it avobenzone? What is it in the product? And then oftentimes down below, you've got your inactive list, which is, sort of below the fold, if you will. And so, it's important to look at both, and it's important to know what's in both. So most of the time people are pretty aware of the active piece, depending on what they're trying to do and what power ingredient they're looking for. And And oftentimes patients are much less aware of what's happening sort of below the fold, as I say, in the inactive ingredients. And that's where we tend to see in my contact derm clinic, patients coming with irritant contact dermatitis, allergic contact dermatitis, and they end up in the patch test clinic.
Nina, thanks for pointing this out, because one of the things I think that's a misconception is, yeah, the active ingredients are really just maybe on the FDA monograph and things they're considering that are drugs. But gosh, those inactive ingredients sure do have activity. I mean, I guess the new kid on the block that really emerged a lot, like bakuchiol, for example, or if you're using other sort of essential oils that may have this effect, or, sometimes they're a fragrance and cause contact derm too. They show up in that inactive list, huh? So Nina, what is it that defines inactive, quote, ingredient, or what, maybe take it even a step back. What does it mean to be clean? What does that
Yeah.
mean?
Oh, gosh. I mean, how long do you have, Raja? Okay. So this is what's tough, right? I mean, there's no clean. What does clean mean, and who defines it? And I think that's what makes the industry so hard, because from where I sit, it can't be clean unless it's hypoallergenic, and that really gets to the inactive piece of this. So I mentioned the regulations around cosmetics and around drugs, but all of that, even in drugs, there's really no regulation whatsoever. That goes to the effects of vehicles, stabilizers, other excipients. And so
right.
Clean is, I think clean, unfortunately, is really in the eye of the beholder and doesn't mean much. You have patients coming in with rip-roaring dermatitis, and they'll say, well, but I'm using these essential oils and they're natural, and I really care about clean skincare. And it's just really hard because it is a word without a lot of meaning.
And I think some people will interpret clean as, the chemicals used are clean, but some will refer to the methods that are clean, or the company that is clean.
Yeah,
You mentioned
exactly.
one of my pet peeve, which is natural. And I say, cyanide is natural, sharks are natural. You wouldn't consider them safe. And so I think we want to talk about safety. And what I find confusing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in some scenarios, you may even find the active ingredient in one product is inactive in the other product, and it just makes it complicated. So how do you guide your patients when they come to you to say, forget the word clean or not, but what is safe? How do you guide them on how to approach the jungle of products that is out there and understand what is safe for daily use?
So it's such an important question. And I love your analogy. I always say, like, poison oak is natural, but I wouldn't recommend rubbing it all over
Yeah,
your
Nina, I wasn't expecting like sharks though to be the example. Nicely done there, Hadar.
Hey, I'm a movie fan, so I go with Jaws any day of the week.
Sharks is good. I'm gonna use that. Hadar, I love that. No, I mean, I think so. The really important place from where I sit and where I start is, fragrance and essential oils, I think, are really important to not be in a product, particularly somebody who's coming in for dermatitis, which, we all see a lot of in our practices, perioral derm, just regular atopic derm, contact derm. It's really a place that I empirically start a lot of removing fragrance. On my no list, there are a lot of things, but I think that I don't like my patients to use things with propylene glycol. It's irritating. It's also allergenic. There are things that our patients expect. Most of my patients come in and they don't want things with parabens. So I think it's really important to take patient preference into the mix too, right? So people have read a lot about, the endocrine effects, and it's complicated with parabens, but I think there are things that folks expect. And so I don't recommend products with parabens. We all as dermatologists are aware of the isothiazolinone epidemic that has gone on for the last 10 years, and they've shown in Europe through good regulation that is changing, which is great. But I don't recommend products with methyl isothiazolinone. I don't recommend products with formaldehyde or formaldehyde releasers. Those are all really important sort of places that I start and have my patients empirically avoid.
This is a topic that I really wanted to talk about, and I love that you're touching upon this. One of the things that I've noticed is that there's no product that'll not create a reaction in anyone. I feel like sometimes you'll have, no matter what product you use, there's always going to be maybe like one or two people that are going to react to it. But I think you are in such an awesome position because you do a lot of contact dermatitis patch testing and whatnot. So can you explain something to me? I get a lot of patients that come in that say, I've been using this product for a year. There's no way that this could have been what had caused the reaction or whatnot. Can you speak to, and maybe this is also how, you think about like what good products are. Do you need to react right away? Can you talk about allergies? Like what kind of a delay might you get before you develop an allergy to something, even if you've, quote, used it every day for a year? Like, what is your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Oh, it's such a great question. And I hear that all the time, right? Like, hey, this is the thing I've been using for 10 years. It can't be that. And in fact, oftentimes it's exactly the thing that it is. And so I think this is one of those like great mysteries of the immune system. Like, what flips the switch and turns a DTH or a type 4 allergy on? We don't really know. But I would say that the time course is hard. And that's why I think, patients really struggle. And that's why contact dermatitis tends to go on for a long time before it gets sorted out. And it's because it's not like immediate hypersensitivity, right? Where go in a dusty room and 10 minutes later you're sneezing and your eyes are watery
Yeah,
and,
right, exactly.
you know what that is. Delayed type hypersensitivity is so tough because it often is, a couple days later. And so patients are so lost when they come in to see us as dermatologists, and they're like, the time course just doesn't really make sense, right? People think of allergy and they think it's that immediate type 1 allergy as a patient. And so nobody's really thinking about, well, what happened like 3-4 days ago, and why is this so varied, and why
Right.
does it sort of ebb and flow?
Yeah, because it could be something that you exposed yourself to maybe a while ago, huh? I mean, that's part
Right.
of the problem.
Totally. And I think the other piece that's tricky is, a lot of times patients will say, okay, well, I changed my stuff for, 2 weeks, and, but I got the rash back anyway.
Right.
And it's like, and the same is true, right? So like the recovery from allergic contact dermatitis is not quick. Those memory T cells are just kind of hanging out in the skin, waiting to, cause a problem. And it takes actually months, assuming you're not re-triggering them, for those rashes and those cells to really kind of subside.
Ooh, I love this point. Oh my gosh. Can I ask you something this I've been dying to ask? And Nina, every time I see like your name, I'm like, I'm going to ask her this question one day. And I never
Oh my
got to
God,
it, but
I'm so
now
excited.
it came to the front of mind. And if I keep talking, I'll forget my question. So I better get right to it. Okay. So the question is, with poison ivy, for example, if you get exposed to poison ivy, it can sit in your skin because it can penetrate in past the stratum corneum and can sit there for up to a month sometimes and whatnot. Is this the same with cosmetic ingredients that have the ability to penetrate in? Is there such a thing as you apply it, then it like absorbs in and it sits in your epidermis while you continue to react to it for a while, even if you stop using the product? Is that a thing or is that not a thing?
I think it's less likely that it's sitting in your epidermis. I haven't done those studies. It's sort of really interesting to think about. But I do think that the T cells, the memory T cells are not meant to be like hanging out in the skin. And so when they get called up, they're essentially stuck. And so that's why the recovery for contact derm, even when you're doing everything right, is so slow. And so I tell my patients, when they come back from patch testing, we say, okay, gee whiz, you're allergic to lanolin and it's in that Aquaphor you've been using. And so we're going to have you stop that. And I tell them at that visit, like, hey, you know what? When you come back and see me in 3 months, my goal is that you're like 30 to 50% better. I try to kind of
Oh,
like,
wow. Yeah, that's good to know, Nina. I don't think I've been telling my patients that. This actually is going to change the way I
Yeah,
counsel patients.
that's a great tip. Thank you.
it's because I usually tell them too, like, I expect you to have some kind of bumps in the road, but overall the trajectory should be improvement. And so when they come back in 3 months, and I say like, well, where are you? Are you 10% better? Are you 50% better? Are you 90? And if they tell me they're, 50 or greater, I'm like, okay, great. We're on the right track.
That's an excellent point. I never thought about it and it kind of makes sense because it's actually the immune response that we're trying to quiesce, not necessarily the trigger to the immune response. And we always say, hey, I always tell my patients, don't get patch tested now. You're very active. But I never thought about it to say, hey, also the effect of stopping the culprit here will also take time just as much to calm things down. So that's an excellent point. I do want to get to one important aspect of our conversation today, and that the new regulation, because it's so confusing. I think now in the US, we have a new act that has been active since 2022 called the Modernization of Cosmetic Regulation Act, or for short, MOCRA, I'm going to say. It sounds great. It sounds like mocha, something you want to order.
Yeah.
I'll take it with oat milk, please.
Yes, exactly. So what is MOCRA and how can it hurt or benefit the patients or the clinicians?
Yeah. So MOCRA is really, in my view, a step in the right direction. So, it's basically a cosmetic regulation act. And as we kind of touched on, drugs are regulated by the FDA and cosmetics really are not. There's no sort of minimum testing that you can sort of make your thing and go and sell it. And the FDA says, good luck. And so MOCRA is meant to help as a starting place for regulation around cosmetics. And so Biden signed that in the end of December in 2022. And the idea is for clear ingredient labeling. So that's something that's been done a lot in Europe and less so in the US. For example, fragrance is a great example, right? Like when you look at a product, what you typically see is just the word fragrance in the US. Whereas if you lived in Europe, there are lots of different fragrance chemicals, and they actually would report like, well, we use eugenol as the fragrance in our product, and they have to report that. So it's meant to one, help with labeling and provide some clarity there. And then also there's going to be mandatory reporting for adverse events and recall power, which is something that's never existed, right? So a patient is using with a drug, of course, that's well known, but it's not something that has been in place with regard to cosmetics in the US.
Just to be clear, especially with cosmetics in the US, there is no FDA approval because they don't have a purview to really approve cosmetics, right? This is more about understanding if there are safety issues that we hear about them earlier. Is that the intent of this?
Yeah, exactly. And, it's a step in the right direction, but I do think that I think that this is one of these scenarios, right, where policy is probably going to always lag behind. And we as dermatologists really need to be out front and in the lead about hey, what is safe for our patients to use? What do we recommend and why?
No, I have a question for you in this realm, Nina. One of the things that people have put forth is, well, the FDA should review these things. I get a little concerned about just if every single thing required FDA approval, then maybe my moisturizer will cost $500 instead of like $5 or $10.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on how to balance this between, because I think there also is a point where if everything requires an approval, then nothing will be available anymore, I think one of the concerns I've heard. And I do share that as a question, and I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really fair point, right? So it can't be that all of a sudden your moisturizer is going to cost you hundreds of dollars. But, I think there are some things that policy-wise would be helpful. You mentioned that there are OTC monographs out there. And so for sunscreens, for example, for someone to develop a sunscreen, they don't have to go through a whole, new drug application. They can kind of go into one of these already sort of trodden paths. And so I think that is something that would be really beneficial moving forward, because you're right. It shouldn't come at the, expense of patients and consumers trying to buy a moisturizer. But I think that, and that's why I think MOCRA is, like I said, a step in the right direction. And you're right, it needs to be reasonable.
One of the things that I talk about is then finding brands that really care about you as a consumer and will go the extra mile. So what can brands do? How can they be better than just meeting the quote minimum requirements? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that I have an opinion. There are a lot of brands out there, and I think that I've used this analogy a couple of times, but when your toilet is having a problem, you call a plumber, not an electrician, right? And so there are a lot of people making skincare, and so a lot of celebrity lines, and sort of it's kind of the in vogue thing where you just start a skincare line. And I think that there are people who know a lot about skincare that are worth listening to in terms of those recommendations and making those products. There are also brands out there, established brands that have a lot of, credibility in and have done testing in the field. And I think that, dermatologists tend to go to those brands, right? Because they know them and they interested in the data and the science behind it. So I think that that's where we, again, have a unique perspective and lens on sort of helping our patients and consumers really go to the right channels.
Yeah, that's a great point. And by the way, I was just recently at the International Society for Investigative Dermatology meeting that was in Japan. And I would argue in Japan, if your bathroom breaks, you may want to call an electrician because there's so many gadgets. I can't even tell you. All right. But more seriously, your point is well taken, is that even if you're a celebrity starting a line, you can be the face of that product, fine. But you better have a really good team of people who understand the skin, who understand the interaction, who understand how to compound things and develop vehicles and the right formulation of any cream for that matter, because that is key to success. And you can stretch your credibility as a celebrity for just that long, but soon enough people realize, oh my gosh, this thing is not working. And even well-known brands, I mean, we've all seen, for example, brands that have been on the market for years, and then I think, to me, the classic example is when they try to come out with a zinc-based sunblock, right? And that can be tricky. I mean, I'm not going to mention names, but I've seen really well-known names fail colossally in that and develop something that's even I can appreciate is not fun to put on your skin. And I'm not a spoiled kind of guy when it comes to that. So definitely you want to have, I think it's a starting point, you want to have a good team of formulators, people who understand what they're doing. Definitely a excellent point. And that also can lead to the issue of safety, right? So if you bring together a good team, then you may be able to avoid this contact dermatitis. You mentioned parabens, kind of going back a full circle, if you will. What are some of the ingredients that patients come to you and they either really, really want or really, really trying to avoid? If you can list the top 1, 2, or 3, and how do you guide them on that? So, because I think that's important for also, to Raja's question, for companies to know, but also for clinicians to kind of understand how to address these concerns.
Yeah, it's a great question. And so, I practice in the Bay Area. And so I think that a lot of my patients are, and I'm sure yours are too, they come in, they're pretty savvy. They've read up on a lot of things. And so pretty much writ large, people are not interested in parabens. People have questions about phthalates, which, have been found in plastic packaging. And so those are things that come up a lot. Patients tend to know less about methyl isothiazolinone, methylchloroisothiazolinone. Some do. And again, those are things that I just sort of are off the list, like just hard nose for me. Same with formaldehyde releasers. I think that having, a sort of a go-to list in your pockets of your favorite things that are, the things that your patients are going to expect that you've done your homework on, and they don't want parabens, and like, okay, you're not going to give it to them. But also they want the power ingredients. They want the antioxidants. They want a vitamin C product. They want to have an anti-aging effect. They want a retinoid type product. And so I think that we, even though it wasn't the first thing or the second thing or the 10th thing I learned in residency, we do have a duty to learn about these things and have some safe and effective options at our fingertips for our patients.
Yeah, Nina, I think thanks for pointing that out. And I think the honest truth is that we actually don't learn about, besides what causes allergies, we don't really learn about functionalities of ingredients that you use in your everyday products as part of residency. And I would challenge that almost no residency teaches that. And I think the fact that you're doing this is pretty amazing. And that leads me to maybe, as we're getting close to wrapping up the podcast, I did want to ask you, what was your philosophy when without necessarily going into like all the subsets of your brand and everything? I do think it's going to be really nice to hear about what's the philosophy of your brand, because you have this brand vetted. And I think you've put a lot of thought into this. You are not the garden variety dermatologist when it comes to ingredients, Nina. You're like in the top echelon of people that actually understand how ingredients can either go wrong or where they can end up leading to issues. What was the approach and the philosophy that you took?
I am definitely in the weeds of ingredients. So
Oh my gosh, a dad joke. Hadar, she's part of the Learn Skin family now. This is perfect.
You
We
are,
were
yes.
waiting for this dad joke, but in the weeds, we should have a button that we push that says you are now officially family. But please go on.
Well, it's funny because like you said, like it wasn't something I thought a lot about as a resident. Really, it wasn't something I thought a lot about, until I got into the weeds of this in my early career. And when I started doing a lot of patch testing, I was like, why are there so many products out there that just have all this stuff in them that doesn't need to be there? Why is this fragrance here? Why is this propylene glycol here? Why is this vitamin E here? It doesn't need to be. And then when we started formulating our products, we realized it became clear to me that the disconnect. And we actually had a hard time finding a lab that we wanted to work with, because a lot of these labs, the chemists are really good at, understanding the right viscosity of a product and how it's going to blend together and to get the right color and the right texture and fragrance. And they're not coming at it from an ingredient standpoint. And so for us, that was, the whole thing. Like every single ingredient has to be vetted, as it were, and it has to be vetted not just for what it does, but what it's not going to do, right? So we don't want irritants, we don't want obviously allergens, but so how do you do that, and how do you get the right mix, and also try to have anti-aging chemicals in there that aren't going to irritate or be allergenic, and so that really is the whole ethos of what we do. Every single ingredient is important, active, inactive, and what it does is just as important as what it's not going to do.
Nina, I have loved the way that you approach patient care, and I actually love the philosophy that you just expressed. In many ways, I think good skincare is like good food. Like there are things that are healthy and there are things that taste good. And our goal is to try to find a way to put it together. And I feel like in skincare, I think you've just kind of highlighted that. There are ingredients that just feel good when they're put on your skin. And then there's things that are healthy. And you're helping us walk into that zone where it's like rarefied air, where it's nice for you, not like detrimental, and it feels good, right? Because at the end of the day, I think people want both the art and the science of skincare.
That's so well said. I couldn't say it any better myself. And I love your food analogy, because every dermatologist loves a good food analogy.
Well, gosh, everything that we've named is like cherry angiomas and stuff like that, right? So for goodness sake, we're like, we clearly did not eat enough food in the origins of dermatology, because all we could do is think about it all day long.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
Absolutely. And even just for the listeners who are not aware, our next integrative dermatology symposium is going to be focused on nutrition. So we love food here.
Oh, thanks for bringing that up, Hadar. October 27th through the 29th in Reno. It's going to be nutrition based, and it's going to be all these faculty. And if you want to come see the great Nina Botto, come to the IDS. And also, Nina, thank you so much for joining us. We'll do this again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for supporting us through the last several seasons. We love receiving your questions on social media. And now, you can call them in as well.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're a licensed medical practitioner, call us at 424-309-8757 and leave a detailed recording with your name, location, clinical question, and it may just be chosen to be answered live on the next podcast.
We look forward to your submissions. And as always, stay curious.